Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
I've always had an unusual line of work. My job title? Supernatural Sanitation Specialist, or in layman's terms, I clean up after paranormal investigators. You see, after they've busted the ghosts, exorcised the demons, and dispelled the dark energies, there's often a surprising amount of residue, let's call it, that they don't want to deal with. That's where I come in. You might be thinking that it sounds like an odd job, and it is, but it's also normally pretty straightforward. I've gotten used to the odd ectoplasm stain, the salt circles left on hardwood floors, the bizarre symbols scrawled onto walls, but this last job, nothing could have prepared me for it. It all started with a call from an anonymous number. I usually received instructions directly from the agencies I worked for, but this time the message was vague and unnerving. A raspy voice said,
"Warehouse 9, by the docks, midnight, come alone."
It was unorthodox, sure, but work had been slow, so I decided to take a chance. I arrived at the desolate warehouse with my toolkit, a strange assortment of holy water, various cleaning supplies, sage, and a few less conventional tools, like a UV light and a Geiger counter. I have to be ready for anything in this job. As I creaked open the large metal door of the warehouse, a sudden chill ran down my spine. There was a feeling in the air that I couldn't quite place, a heavy static that seemed to buzz in my ears and make the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. And there, in the center of the vast, shadowy expanse of the warehouse, was the aftermath of what looked like the most intense paranormal investigation I'd ever encountered. But as I stepped closer, I realized that it wasn't the disarray that unnerved me. It was the utter silence. It was as if this place was not just devoid of sound, but was actively swallowing it. And that's when I saw it. In the dim light filtering in through the cracked skylights, there, in the heart of the warehouse, I saw a circle. Not the usual chalk or salt circle I was accustomed to cleaning up, but a ring seared into the concrete, as if by intense heat. Within this blackened circle were symbols, the likes of which I'd never seen before, pulsing with a faint and eerie light. And in the very center of the circle, disturbingly out of place, was a small, ordinary-looking wooden chair. But it was the way the chair was positioned, the way the dim light seemed to refuse to illuminate it fully, that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as though it was waiting for someone, or something. Ignoring the voice in my head screaming at me to get out, I approached the circle. My Geiger counter remained silent, and the UV light showed nothing unusual, which should have been a relief, but it wasn't, because the static feeling in the air was growing stronger, as though the warehouse itself was holding its breath. I reached out a gloved hand towards the circle, my fingers inching closer to the pulsating symbols. Just as I was about to touch one, a cold gust of wind blasted through the warehouse, slamming the door shut and plunging the space into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my flashlight, the only sound in the oppressive silence. When the beam of light pierced the darkness, I froze. The chair was no longer empty. On it was a porcelain doll, its glassy eyes and painted smile seemingly innocent if it wasn't for the sheer terror seizing my heart. It was just a doll, right? As I took a step back, the doll's head turned, its eyes meeting mine. A chill unlike any I'd ever felt before swept before me, rooting me to the spot. I should have run. I should have left right then, but I couldn't. And as I stood there, frozen in terror, the doll spoke. The voice that came from the doll was soft yet penetrating, echoing from the darkened warehouse. It didn't move its painted lips, but the words seemed to form directly in my mind. "Cleaner," it said. "You've stepped into a circle that you don't understand." My heart pounded in my chest like a sledgehammer, but despite my fear, I found the courage to respond. "What are you?" "I am the binding," it replied. Its glass eyes shone in the darkness, reflecting the eerie symbols from the circle beneath it. I keep the unseen at bay, but a mistake was made. A seal was broken. That's why you were called. Stammering, I asked, "What do you need me to do?" The porcelain doll remained silent for a moment, its eyes seeming to bore into mine. "Re-establish the seal. Close the circle." "But how?" I began, only for the doll to interrupt. "You have the tools. You have the knowledge. The rest is courage." Suddenly, I understood. The strange symbols, the mysterious call, the empty warehouse. It was all a test of courage, of will, of faith. Taking a deep breath, I reached into my toolkit and brought out a piece of chalk, a small vial of salt, and a flask of holy water. As I did, the static energy in the warehouse seemed to hum with anticipation. I began the painstaking process of tracing the symbols, copying them from the edges of the circle. The chalk moved smoothly over the concrete, as though guided by an unseen force. I then sprinkled salt along the lines I had drawn, the grains sticking as if magnetized to the chalk. Finally, I uncapped the flask of holy water, but as I started to sprinkle it around the circle, I felt a chilling gust of wind. The warehouse seemed to groan and creak. The doll's eyes flashed menacingly, and I felt an immense force pushing against me, as if trying to stop me from completing the circle. My body strained against the invisible force, my fingers trembling as I struggled to keep my grip on the flask. Fear threatened to overtake me, but then I remembered the doll's words. The rest is courage. With a final surge of determination, I pushed against the force, managing to sprinkle the last of the holy water onto the circle. As the water hit the ground, a bright light enveloped the circle, and a deafening silence filled the warehouse. The oppressive atmosphere lifted as though a heavy fog had cleared. The doll on the chair sat still and lifeless, its glassy eyes no longer glowing. Exhausted but relieved, I stood up and took a step back, looking at the resealed circle. The porcelain doll sat inert on the chair, back to being a simple toy, or so I thought. As I began to gather my tools, a hollow laughter echoed through the warehouse, freezing me in my tracks. I spun around to see the doll, its glassy eyes now flickering with an ominous glow. The grin on its painted lips seemed to have widened. "You have done well, cleaner," its voice echoed in my mind, sending a shiver down my spine. "But you misunderstood my instructions. You see, I am not the binding. I am the bound." A sudden understanding, like a cold hand closing around my heart, dawned upon me. The symbols, the circle, they were not meant to contain an unseen force. They were meant to contain the doll, or rather, the entity that was within the doll. The doll continued, its laughter resonating within the empty warehouse. "And you, dear cleaner, have freed me." Before I could react, the doll's eyes flashed brightly, and the world around me started to blur. My legs felt heavy, my body sluggish, as if I was being pulled in by a tremendous force. I reached out, trying to grab onto something, anything, but my fingers simply phased through. In a last, desperate attempt, I turned to run, but it was too late. I was being drawn in, my vision tunneling to the side of the doll's gleeful eyes. The world collapsed around me, and then there was darkness. As consciousness slowly returned, I found myself in an unsettling silence. A sense of claustrophobia closed in on me. I tried to move, but couldn't. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. All I could do was observe through glassy eyes as the warehouse door creaked open and a figure stepped in, a flashlight beam sweeping the floor. And on his belt, I spotted familiar tools, a piece of chalk, a small vial of salt, and a flask of holy water. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. The roles had been switched. Now I was the bound, trapped within the doll, waiting for the next unsuspecting cleaner.